Hi everybody. In this video discussion board, I want to talk a little bit about the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church, and its importance to American history. The AME Church split from the Methodist denomination, traditionally dated to 1787, even though there's a little debate over when that exact date. And as the Methodist Church backed away from its strong anti-slavery stance. So the Methodist Church, primarily Wesleyan Methodism, was really built and established upon kind of an anti-slavery sentiment. They were some of the more important missionaries to African Americans, especially those who were still slaves at the time. Yet, as the 19th century progressed, as it began, especially towards the mid-19th century, a growing division began to take place, primarily between Northern and Southern Methodists, and many Northern Methodists decided to try and back away from the issue of anti-slavery, seeing it as an issue of division. And this was not in any way good for African American Methodists. They, especially those who had been born slaves and freed, saw this as a slippery slope which would lead to their continual seeing their brothers and sisters in bondage. And that was not okay for them. The AME was established by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, which were some of the first Methodist ministers that were African American to be licensed to preach and ordained to preach in the Methodist Church. In 1794, Jones became the minister of St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Philadelphia, the nation's first African American Methodist Episcopal congregation, really starting and serving as the primary area for the AME Church, working there out of Philadelphia. Now, there were three ways primarily that the AME served to equip and empower African Americans from this point forward. And it's important that we see the AME and what they established as being one of the first for black societies and black denominations. Many prior to this were white Christians, white Americans that were working for the freedom of slaves and working for blacks, but this was a black empowered church and denomination that was working for blacks itself. And there were three ways in which it was able to do that. One, through social and religious organizations. Two, through African American publications. And then three, through private African American education. So organizations, publications, and education. That was the three ways in which the AME was vital in promoting and pushing and empowering African Americans in a time where there was not much, if anything, for them in society. First, as it pertains to social organization, they became a prototype for other African American fraternal organizations devoted to religious and social concerns. In 1793, Jones and Allen led other African Americans in providing aid to the entire population of Philadelphia during a dreadful epidemic of yellow fever. And I think it's important to note it was the entire population. It wasn't just blacks in Philadelphia. Though they were primarily a black organization for other blacks, they saw themselves as wanting to help all. It was not a matter of one versus other. It was a matter of equality. And I think that's really important to see in their way that they dealt with and helping all in Philadelphia during the yellow fever. After the Civil War, the Freedmen's Aid Society was created as the agency within the Methodist Episcopal Church, which began active and effective relief work among blacks in the South. So the issue was, all right, finally, our brothers and sisters, our African American brothers and sisters in the South have been freed. But that's just the beginning of the battle. Now we have to deal with lack of education, lack of trade skills, lack of the ability to write and read, lack of having any kind of source to help permeate information to African American communities and things like that. And so this is where the two other major areas where the AME was vital in helping, the first being with African American publications. Perhaps the greatest one of those was the Recorder. It produced organizational and scriptural publications on which local congregations depended, and also sought to stitch geographically dispersed populations and itinerant AME ministers into a united black church. These publications were vital in promoting African American literature, cultural advancement, ecclesiological practices, and ultimately establishing the most Christianized group in America. And there's no doubt about that. Even today, not in any way referring to political ideas, but as it pertains to Christian ideas, the African American community is by far one of the most conservative Christian communities in America. And much of that is through the history and the ideas and the Christianizing work of these African American publications, which were so important to African American communities in the 19th and 20th centuries. The AME was also vital in establishing and promoting educational and employment opportunities by establishing black schools like Philander Smith College. The AME, through schools like Philander Smith, were able to equip many former slaves and turn them into very educated men and extremely apt trade and industrial workers, and in turn served as the most vital influence in the development of the historically black colleges and universities here in America. And now as we close there, I just briefly want to note the reality that what makes the AME so important is that in a time where there were little to no organizations, educations, or publications for African American communities, they were vital in giving these opportunities, giving these tools to African American communities, and thus creating a stronger, more empowered African American society within America, causing that gap between whites and African Americans to vastly close. What once seemed as an impassable chasm was growing further and further, now almost exactly equal. And with that, a stronger, more educated, more equipped African American community, and with that, a greater America. God bless.